extremely brief. So one thing I will mention, for those of you who are following the Scrum Alliance training, we are a Scrum endorsed user group. So for all of our events, including this, you'll get a number of SEU points, depending on how many hours. So it's two SEU points for this evening. So those of you who are doing that, information, and thanks to Vince for setting it up. Also, thank you to Daniel for recording the event. So thank you for that. And again, we've got our YouTube channel. We need more subscribers, because when you get to a certain number of subscribers, we can actually change the URL on our YouTube channel, so that you don't have to remember this long number. We're also on Twitter now as well, so you might, especially if we've got paid for events and things, sometimes we're going to put discounts, things like that, early notification, early bird prices. So if you subscribe to Twitter, then follow along Twitter, whatever, you get some notice of those things. So that's all been set up recently. And of course, thank you for the room to Darren and Miller. This is wouldn't be possible basically without their help. So thank you very much for that. So what we found is that when people are talking, it's very difficult to capture people's what they're saying on video. So what we're going to do this week is we've got a microphone. So if anyone wants to speak, now I'm not sure exactly how we're going to manage it, but maybe if some, I don't know, raise hand or something, and myself or Scott give you the mic, and then when you talk, we'll actually be able to hear both sides of the conversation. It'll make the videos so much more useful on the YouTube channel, and then when we watch them, we can actually get both sides. So if there's a lot of conversation, it'd be great. So if you just raise your hand or whatever, and grab the mic, or one of us will give it to you. Okay, that's me. Better than me to really introduce Scott, co-creator of DAD. I'll let him kind of introduce himself.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay. So first of all, thanks for taking time out of your busy days to come and hear this talk. Hopefully there'll be a few interesting ideas for you. So what I'd like to talk about tonight is how I view the a Discipline Agile enterprise. So in this talk, I'll explain what Discipline Agile delivery is all about, and then how it's a foundation from which to scale both at the team level, scaling Agile, as well as at the organization level, because there's two different flavors of scale, which I think we often seem to commingle or confuse. So I want to be a little bit clear about that. So it's based on experiences that I've had, my organization has had over the years. And so I'm hoping to first of all, get you thinking outside of the box. I'll give you a warning, we're going to cover a lot of ground tonight. But so I want to just sort of blast you with ideas and get you thinking outside the box a little bit. So if you're brand new to Agile, this will definitely be thought-provoking. Even if you have several years of experience doing this Agile stuff, I will hopefully also get you thinking outside of the box, because things are a bit different when you go beyond a few small development teams and start looking at how does this affect an Agile IT department? How do we actually scale Agile to meet the real needs that we find ourselves in these more enterprise class organizations? You start finding that the rules start to change, that it's a different game at the scale or at scale or at the enterprise level. I'm going to share data from a bunch of surveys that I've done over the years. So one of the things I like to do is have fact-based discussions. So I'm a firm believer in finding out what people are actually doing, what's actually working, and sometimes not working out there. So going beyond anecdotal evidence and finding out, and so asking the types of questions that people might not want to, about the types of things that people might not want to talk about publicly. So I'll share some data with you from these various surveys. Now, the type of research that I do is completely open. We run at the highest level of openness possible. So all the data that all the survey data I'm about to show you, the raw data is available to you free of charge at ambisoft.com. So you don't have to trust me at all. You don't have to trust my analysis. You don't have to trust anything I say. You can actually go and take a look at the questions as they were asked. So if you're worried about bias, if you think you can, if you think you're a great survey designer or whatever, you're more than welcome to look at the questions as they were asked. You're more than welcome to go and download the source data as the answers were given, and then you can then take a look at my analysis, and I think you'll find that it's pretty much as fair as fair and unbiased as you're ever going to get, because I'm very lucky to be working with several researchers who are more than happy to provide advice and give me feedback on these survey designs. I'm very also lucky to have several graduate level students that are actively use the data that I produce for their research as well. So I get reality checks in that way as well. So, anyways, we'll see some results from some various surveys. So what's the story I'm about to tell? I'm going to start with the end in mind, and then we'll work our way towards into some of the detail here. So first of all, what is an agile enterprise, or what is a lean enterprise? So if you want to talk about, feel free to use the term lean enterprise if you don't like agile enterprise. I'm not really all that concerned about labels like that anymore. But anyways, the idea with this agile or this lean enterprise is we should be able to anticipate and react to changes in the marketplace, to opportunities, to take these opportunities as they arise, and hopefully do it in a much more effective manner than our competition. We should be constantly learning. We should have a culture that that enables us to learn, enables us to share, enables us to get better. And so we need this learning mindset. We need this flexible cultural aspect as well. So to pull this off, I need agile IT. Because in the vast majority of organizations, the vast majority of situations, these new products that we're bringing to market, these new services we're bringing to market are enabled by technology. They're enabled by IT. So for my enterprise to be agile or to be lean, my IT department needs to be able to work in an agile or lean manner. And if it can't, then we've got a few issues. And when you start looking at an agile IT organization, we really need to look at, if you follow the Gartner and Forrester, the analysts of the world, they talk in terms of plan, build, and run. So there's several aspects to an IT organization. It's not just about software development. And in most organizations, most of the spend is not on new software development, the types of things that we like to talk about in the Agile community. And then finally, of course, we need Agile and Lean development to support this. So, and if we can't react quickly, react quickly to these new requirements as they're coming in and be able to support them, then it all falls apart. So we need all three levels of agility, or all three levels of leanness in order to pull, and more actually, but we'll stay focused on these three levels. So I want to explore several questions that I think are fairly important. First of all, what is the current state of Agile? So for those of you working in organizations where you're still sort of new to Agile, or you're still sort of just getting used to it, or even leery, you haven't even started it yet, then we'll explore what the heck is going on out there. And sometimes the picture's not as pretty as some of the people might lead us to believe. It's a good picture, but certainly not the ideal world that I keep hearing about. Then we'll explore a little bit more what this Agile enterprise and this Agile IT stuff looks like. And then finally, we'll get into how do you actually pull this off? So how do these disciplined Agile teams work? Particularly at how do we start doing this stuff at scale? And then finally, I'll give a little bit of advice around transition issues. So what does this, if we want to actually become an Agile IT organization or an Agile enterprise in general, what might we have to consider to make this work in the transition to it? Because it's a little bit more than hiring a few coaches usually. So anyway, so what's the current state of Agile? Is the glass? Here's a good question. How many people think the glass is half full? How many people think it's half empty? Yeah, the real answer is it's full, completely full. Half with water and half with air. So we need to think outside the box a bit. So anyways, trick question. I always like to see how people are thinking at this late at night. Okay, so anyways, this is a survey I did for Dr. Dobbs' Journal a little under a year ago. Sadly, if you haven't heard, Dr. Dobbs' Journal recently folded. Anyways, it's hard in the publishing industry. Is the short story. Wonderful magazine, and then finally a website over the years. But it's hard to make money advertising, giving away things for free, apparently. From this survey, What we were trying to do with this survey is find out, how well are these Agile adoptions going? Are companies actually doing Agile? And it's interesting. So in this survey, one of the questions we asked was, of the existing team that you're on, how would you characterize your development process? Is it mostly Agile, mostly lean, mostly traditional? Don't know. And roughly half the people that responded to the survey said, yeah, about half, our team's mostly Agile. Some were, about 20% said it was mostly iterative, like a unified process type of a thing, perhaps. Some people were saying traditional. Some people, they're thinking they were hacking. A small, 7% said they were more of a lean, like a Kanban-ish type of a team. And then 2% said they didn't, either was other or they didn't know. So of the development teams out there, it seems that a decent percentage of them are Agile, lean, or iterative, and roughly less than a quarter are either hacking or doing traditional, at least for the people that respond to this survey. We also, so of the people who said that their organization is doing Agile, we asked a question of basically, so how well is their adoption going? Roughly 1 in 10 said that it was a great success. Bad news for those of us who are Agile coaches. 33% said that it's successful, so that's not so bad. So, a little less than half say things are going pretty darn well. 40% though said neither. It's neither a success nor it's a failure. So, the jury's still out on this. Small percentage said it was either a failure or a great failure, and 11% said it was very obviously too early to tell. So we always, I'm a firm believer in giving people an out. So if they don't know or they don't want to answer, then we give them options to indicate that. So anyways, less than half think their Agile adoptions so far, at least, are successful. This doesn't bode well, or might not bode well, I should say. We also asked a question of, those of you who are doing Agile, have you had one or more Agile successes? So the good news is that some of the organizations that are experimenting with Agile, 71% in this survey, this is about a year and a half ago now, said that yes, not only are we doing Agile, but we have had at least one successful team at it. Only 1 in 7 said, yeah, we've tried it, but we haven't succeeded at it yet. So that could be, the very first pilot project was a loser, and they're just about to start the second one, so we don't quite know where they were. But there have been some problems. But only 12% said they haven't tried Agile yet, which was interesting. So this is also probably good news. But anyway, so it's reasonably positive. We are seeing organizations with successes. But I'm also a firm believer in going at it from the opposite point of view. So we also asked the same question, but this time, have you had some failed Agile projects or failed Agile teams? And a little over half said, yeah, we've had at least one failure. Now this could be a very large organization with hundreds of teams and one of them failed, so therefore that organization's had at least one failure. Or it could be a very large organization with dozens of teams and they've all failed. We don't quite know. But at least they've had at least one failure here. And although a little over a quarter of them said, yeah, we haven't had any failures yet. So that's okay. So anyways, it's not a perfect picture. And it's not quite, there's no guarantees of success. Organizations are in fact succeeding. In general, I think it's positive, but there are some challenges out there. So we need to be a little bit smarter about this. So, don't let anybody spin you a story about how easy or how, guaranteed all this sort of stuff is. So what does it mean to scale? So I'm a development team. What does it mean for a development team to scale? So some of the obvious stuff, obviously a large team is at scale. So, so there's been Agile teams out there as small as size 2. I don't believe in this rhetoric of a team of 1. That's one person. It's not a team. So you need at least 2 people on a team to make it a team. But some organizations have been successful with project teams or program teams of hundreds of people. And there's reported successes out there. Now, you might not know how to do that, but other organizations have figured it out. So this is something we need to respect. And I've got survey data showing this. Actually, specifically from this survey that I'm quoting at the bottom. There's there's somewhere out there in the world reporting successful Agile teams of various levels of size, and there's also people out there in the world who are failing at different levels of size. So once again, there's no guarantees. Similarly with geographic distribution. So in the ideal, you're a co-located team. Then if you have people working in cubes or in different floors in the same building, now you're near located, no longer co-located. You're now still slightly distributed. There's some very good research evidence out there that if you're a bus length away, or I guess a coach length away, here in the UK, from somebody, there's a very low chance of you actually talking with them face to face, unless you happen to bump into them in the hallway. So something as simple as being several cubes down the hall has a measurable impact on your effectiveness to communicate and your ability to collaborate, and thus your team success rate. Let alone if you're in a different building across the city or across the planet. The more geographically distributed you are, your project risk goes up, your team risk goes up, and your success rate goes down. Okay, this is very easy to measure, and I can point you at wonderful amounts of data on this if you don't believe me. So the interesting thing, and I found this many years in a row, is that the minority of Agile teams are co-located. This is one of the great myths in the Agile community, that we're all co-located and everyone's running fine. No, this is the minority. The majority have some form of geographic distribution. As soon as you're in cubes, you've erected barriers to communication, these things called cube walls. You're now distributed, and your success rate goes down by several percentage points. This is easy to measure if you choose to. So I would, if you're still in cubes or in offices, I would suggest you maybe reconsider that. Sometimes we're organizationally distributed. The best case scenario, we're all working for a single division of the same company. As soon as we're a little organizationally distributed, as soon as we get multiple divisions involved, suddenly politics starts to rear its ugly head. The life of the product owner becomes a little more difficult because they've got a wider range of stakeholders to deal with, and so on. Let alone if you're part of a consortium of companies working on co-working on something, or if you're outsourcing to other organizations, bringing more risk in and more things. And the interesting point, another interesting point of all this, a couple things. First, the desirable or the least risky approaches are on the left-hand side, and the less desirable approaches or situations are on the right-hand side. I think, just to give you a little bit of formatting information here. But what's also interesting, I think it's obvious that a small team, so a team of 5 people, will work differently than a team of 20 people, then a team of 50 people, then a team of 200 people. So the types of techniques that we'll use on a team of 200 will be very different than a team of 5. And so the techniques for a team of 5 people will not get the job done, will be insufficient for a team of 200, but the techniques that work for coordinating and organizing a team of 200 people will be the kiss of death for a team of 5 people, be overkill. Right? You don't want to do that. So different teams in different situations will do different things. So context counts. I find a lot of organizations are still in this mindset of, I need to have a repeatable process across all my teams, a single, one process to rule them all. And that's great if all of your teams are in the exact same situation and all your people are clones of each other. But even like my team of 5 people will work differently than your team of 5 people, because you're a different group of people. And you'll have different ways of working, different ways of thinking, different skills, different backgrounds, and as a result, you will self-organize in a different way. So at the IT level, at the enterprise level, we need to be flexible enough to handle that. So that'll be something I'll talk a little bit about when we talk about transitioning to all this sort of stuff. Sometimes we have regulatory compliance. Roughly 1/3 of Agile teams are in some sort of a regulatory compliance situation. They've got Sarbanes-Oxley, the Basel II or Basel III, whatever it is now, FDA regulations, security regulations, ISO stuff, whatever it happens to be. So you're going to work differently in a non-regulated environment compared to, say, being under financial regulations, as compared to, say, being on the far end, life critical or FDA type regulations. I've personally done Agile and working on medical devices, and obviously I would hope you can see, hope you can imagine that working on an Agile team working on a medical device will work in a slightly more sophisticated manner than an Agile team banging out an informational website. Okay, it shouldn't be a surprise. We have ranges of domain complexity as well. So on the one end, we got these very straightforward things: build a website. In the middle ground, build a financial processing system. On the far end, let's build an air traffic control system or something. Obviously, it's a few more complexities. Or let's build the logistics system for a transport organization. If you've ever done any sort of logistics things, you'll know how much of a nightmare that can be. And sometimes we've got technical complexity. Yeah, we got these straightforward situations where we're building a silo application using brand new technology that doesn't have to integrate with anything. Wow. I've heard about these. I've never actually seen that in the real world. I hear about these things, never actually seen one. The things that I get to see, we're working with legacy technologies. We've got to clean up some legacy code. We have to at least integrate with the legacy code, let alone clean it up. We're working on multiple platforms. I got to worry about mobile and internal browsers and external browsers and all these various platforms to support. I've got legacy data sources that I have to reuse. I've got legacy data sources that I have to fix. I got combinations thereof. The technical complexity can be an actual nightmare in some of these organizations. Okay, and this is the reality that we all face. So obviously, I'm going to work a lot differently if I've got to be working this legacy stuff, working on multiple platforms. If I've got to be paying down the technical debt in any sort of coherent manner, it's going to be a much different ballgame. So when I talk about scale, when I talk about scaling agile software development, these are the sorts of things that I'm thinking about, because any given team will be on all six of those scales, and the more over to the right you are, the greater the risk you face, and the different you're going to have to work in a more sophisticated, more complex manner in order to get if you want to be successful. So one process size, one organization structure size does not fit all. So I would advise you to beware of these prescriptive processes that offer the promise of solving all your problems. They're often very, very narrowly focused on a certain set and can get you into trouble outside of their scope. So is this actually happening? I think this is a fair question. So as I said, so this is some data from a survey from about a year ago, where we basically asked, depending on so we asked for across various types of software development paradigms, and we basically asked, what types of scaling factors is your team currently facing now? So it's not fantasy world stuff. It's not have you done it in the past. It's what are you facing right now, today, on your team? So we're finding that interestingly, 48%, so almost half of Agile teams are bigger than 10. Goes against a little bit of that, goes against some of that 7 plus or minus 2 advice I keep hearing about. So roughly half doesn't seem to count. Something called empiricism, by the way, when you can start observing things and have data, actual real data, we're starting to get into empirical land as opposed to talking about empiricism. And what's interesting is that, and now this includes lean, this includes all like in this version of the slide, this is all teams. So it's interesting, if we were to take the difference between Agile and not Agile, because roughly half the teams are Agile in this survey, 36% of the non-Agile teams are greater than 10. So Agile teams, because the blue includes both Agile and non-Agile. So it's sort of a goofy slide that way. Sorry about that. So anyway, so Agile teams are more likely these days to be bigger than non-Agile teams, which goes completely against a lot of the advice in the Agile community. But to be fair, I think it's because we're taking on harder problems these days. And because we're taking on more complex problems, we generally need a few more people on the team. So I think that's I can't guarantee that for sure, but gut feel tells me that's what's happening. And sure enough, we're seeing Agile teams that are taking on, Agile teams are more likely to be taking on complex domain problems now. So as a result, I think that's why we have the larger teams. What's interesting, when it comes to complexity, statistically, we're seeing the same, because my Agile team is working in the same environment as the traditional team down the hall from us. So we've got the same basic probabilities of hitting the technology complexity because we're working in these legacy environments, which I thought was interesting. We've got, in this survey it was I said it was 1/3 chance of being compliant. It's actually, in this case, we found 43% of Agile teams would end up in a compliancy type of an environment. Because these regulations, they're not paradigm specific, right? So if I'm working in a healthcare environment, I'm going to be following healthcare type regulations. It is what it is. If I'm in a financial industry, I'll be following financial regulations. It's just the nature of the beast. So anyways, the point is this is happening. So these scaling factors that I just walked us through, this is not theory, this is observable stuff going on. And hopefully, I'm probably belaboring the point, but it's happening out there. So should we not be, when we're giving advice, when people are writing articles, when they're writing books, should they not be putting their advice in context? Should they not be telling you, so given this certain situation, I found TDD to work reasonably well. Given this other situation, I found TDD to not work so well. And here's probably why, right? Would that not be something we should get to as an industry? So let's start talking about moving towards a more enterprise point of view or more scaling point of view. So what are some of the challenges that we face? I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but we've got interesting cultures is a polite way of saying it in some of these organizations. We often have very differing business goals. The IT department and the business folks might not always agree, or different business divisions might not be getting along. We often have inflexible governance. I think, unfortunately, one of the things that I've been noticing, and I've got survey and research data on this as well, is that the IT governance processes in many organizations are a bit off. They actually inject more risk than they remove, that from what I can tell. Particularly when it comes to Agile, I find a lot of companies, the governance folks have not kept up with this new Agile stuff, and they're still trying to govern in a traditional manner and actually inflicting pain on these Agile teams and often putting them at risk. And then it's a big surprise when we're not seeing the amount of benefits from Agile that we should be. Well, it's because the management team hasn't evolved yet. So keep that in mind when we talk about transitional stuff. So how can we move to being more towards a lean or an Agile enterprise? So I'm going to make a questionable assumption, and let's assume, because we're the Agile community, so let's assume that we are the center of the universe. We're the most important thing. Agile software development is the most important thing in your organization. Everything revolves around Agile software development. Let's just make this strange assumption for a minute. I don't think it holds, but it's an interesting assumption. So in the Agile community, we've done a lot of great things. The Agile folks we've really come along. We've upped our game in many aspects of construction. This concept of self-organizing teams has been popular. This having a value-driven life cycle where you're working in business value order and you're producing good stuff for the company. All great stuff. The fact that we promote this idea of being team-aware, that teams of people build systems, and we need to work. We need to succeed as a team, not just as individuals. Wonderful start, but we can do better. So Disciplined Agile delivery helps to up our game. So we realize basic things, like having clickers that work. There we go. That it's not just about construction, but really we should be looking at end-to-end delivery. What's the end-to-end value stream that we're interested in? Not just let's make construction work well. One of the big challenges in the Agile community is that most organizations that are claiming to be doing Agile, they're really doing something called water scrumfall or scrummy fall, where you have a very heavy project initiation effort, a lightweight construction, okay, that's great, and a heavyweight release or transition phase, also not so great. So so we've improved construction, but because we sort of many of the Agile folks have sort of seeded project initiation and project and deployment for whatever reasons, we end up with this water scrumfall approach, because the organizations that are adopting Scrum and adopting Agile are still doing the same old front end stuff and the same old back end stuff. So there's room for improvement. So we really need to look at at least the full delivery life cycle, if not more. Risk and not just business value when we're prioritizing our work, when we're working through our life cycles. Self-organization is great, but we need some adult supervision. We need appropriate governance. I don't want Agile team. Your organization doesn't want all these Agile teams running around doing their own thing. That works really well if you've only got one or two teams. But say you've got several dozen teams. Say you've got a couple hundred teams. Nobody in an organization of that size wants all those Agile teams thinking through the architecture for the systems by themselves. There has to be some sort of consistency. They've got to be constrained a bit. There's got to be some sort of corporate guidelines as to how we're going to do this sort of stuff. Otherwise, your production environment becomes a complete dog's breakfast. And we see this all the time in organizations. We've got to get this stuff under control. And the really successful organizations, all these cool DevOps companies that we keep hearing about, they have consistent operational environments. They're very tight on the types of technologies that they're allowed to use to develop, because they know that as soon as they have multiple systems running on multiple platforms and different versions of things, they're out of luck. They can't be agile. They can't be lean and as swift anymore because of these inconsistencies, because of these challenges with testing and all that good sort of stuff. So we got to start getting a little bit smarter about this. In many of the organizations I work in, the development teams are always complaining about, we're doing Agile, this is great, but we've still got all these, screwy funding mechanisms. We're still doing big estimates up front and all this sort of stuff, right? So that's that's governance that's more than likely out of sync with the way we should actually be working. So we've got to work with the business folks that are, the financial people that are trying to govern us, and try to help them understand that this desire to have a fixed estimate up front is really injecting a lot of risk into our teams. We've got to give them better options. We've got to start educating them. We've got to get away from this prescriptive one process size fits all approach and go to more of a goal-driven or a more flexible capability-driven approach where we have choices. Because my team will make a different set of process choices than your team because we're in different situations, and rightfully so. So we've got to enable this somehow. And we should be enterprise aware. My team has to realize that my team is only one of many in this organization. I should be leveraging these other teams. So in some of the Agile canon, we talk about, let's protect the team from the rest of the organization. The team leader, the Scrum Master, will be the deflector shield in the Starship Enterprise, and we're going to protect. My job is to protect the team from the rest of the organization. What an incredibly ignorant thing to advise. That's just ignorant. I can't even find another word for that. Any team that's remotely competent wants to leverage the rest of the organization. I want to get the data folks doing stuff for me so that way I don't have to set up the database, so that way I don't have to do all this data work. I want to work with the enterprise architects to find things that I can reuse. I want to find out, how can the enterprise architects help me? What guidance can they give me to make my life easier, to speed me up? I don't need to be protected from the enterprise architects. I need them to help me do my job. I don't need to be protected. No. Now, they might need protection from me. That could be a different story. But certainly, I want to leverage them. I want to work effectively with these other teams. I don't want to have to be reinventing the wheel just because it's the simplest thing possible, most convenient thing for my team. I want to be doing what's right for the company. I want to be doing things like paying down technical debt. I don't want to be injecting more technical debt, because as soon as I do convenient things for me, like set up yet another customer database because I don't want to work with this legacy data over here, I've just injected technical debt into my company. That is probably not the long-term solution that we should be looking for, right? So we need to be a little more mature, a little more robust in the way that we work. So there's ways we can do it. And you know what? If we work this way, things are more efficient, they're more effective than when we're trying to fight the rest of the organization to get the job done. Let's collaborate. Let's be respectful from now on. And then finally, once I learn how to do this in fairly straightforward situations, then we can start scaling. Then we can start worrying, if I don't know how to do Agile with a reasonably small team, what makes me think I can do it with a team of 50 or 500? If I can't do Agile in a co-located environment, what makes me think I can do globally distributed development? If I can't do Agile successfully in my company, what makes me think I can manage an outsourced team? Right? And so on. We've got to learn how to walk before we try to run. And I think a lot of companies that struggle with scaling Agile is they tried to go from 0 to 60 in half a millisecond. They took a few training courses and suddenly, let's go do Agile on this globally distributed 300 person program in a regulatory environment, building this brand new highly complex thing, and they wonder why it blows up in their face. Well, they didn't know how to do it. Now the implication of this is, as an individual, I need to be able to work in all these situations. I should be able I should know the basic Agile Scrum Lean stuff, and I should be able to know as an individual how I would do that in whatever situation I face. So if I'm working on this large geographically distributed regulatory team right now, I'm going to work in a manner that reflects that reality. Versus next year I'm working on a small co-located team, I will work in a different way because I'm in a different situation. So as professionals, we need to be flexible enough to tailor our own approaches as people. Similarly at the team level, on my team, we need to self-organize, we need to own our process, we need to figure out how we're going to work together in the various situations that we face. I need to be able to do this at the IT level. So, and this is where it becomes hard, because at the IT level, I might have some small co-located teams doing Agile, I might have some other teams doing Lean, I might have some other teams that are, a medium-sized Agile regulatory team, I might have a team over here that's a large Lean team that's geographically distributed. Different teams in different situations, made up with different people, but yet my IT department in general needs to be able to support all of those teams and enhance them. If I'm an enterprise architect, I need to be able to work in an effective manner with all those different types of teams in different situations. I shouldn't be trying to locally optimize the enterprise architecture process, have only one way to work with the enterprise architects. That might work very well for that medium-sized lean team, but it'll probably be overkill for the small Agile teams, and it will probably be underwhelming for the large geographically distributed Agile team. Okay, so if I have to support teams in different situations, I've got to be prepared to work in different situations. And then finally, at the organization level, it's the same basic issue. From a business leader point of view, I've got to be prepared if I'm working with a small Agile team in order to get this system done for me, great. If I'm working with a larger Lean team over here to build some other thing to support me, great. I'm going to be interacting with those teams in different manners. I'll be feeding them information in different ways and getting feedback from them and to them in different ways. Different teams, different situations. We've got to be prepared as an organization to work differently. We've got to be prepared to govern those teams in different situations differently. So it's an interesting environment that we face. So what does an Agile IT department look like? So as I said, if you read the Gartner material, Forrester material, they're pretty clear. They like to talk in terms of plan, build, and run. So the planning is this long-term thinking, so enterprise architecture, product management, portfolio management perhaps, good stuff like that. In the build environment, we've got the types of things we like to do. Let's build new systems. Let's do Agile software development. Let's do Lean software development. Let's even do the traditional software development as well. That can be okay in some situations. And in the run environment, we've got to operate and support these things that we're building. Now, what will happen is, let's look at this from where does the IT budget typically go? So now these are just rough numbers, but your organization depends. But usually what you'll find is that a small percentage goes to this planning stuff. A slightly bigger percentage goes to build, like new software development, and a large portion goes to running and sustaining the organization. And if you've been around for more than a few years, I'm sure you've sat in on some management presentations where the basic story is, well, if we could only get more efficient at this, if we could cut our run cost by 33%, we could double or triple the amount of money. We could just divert all that cash, put it into build, and be that much faster. And there's something to be said for that. So why not try it? So it's interesting. An interesting observation is that the Agile community for years has been focusing on build, and obviously making that efficient is a good thing. Making all this efficient is a good thing. But really, if we were looking at the bigger picture, we really should have been spending more of our time making operations and support and sustainment activities more effective, because we could have saved more money there to divert over the fun things that we like to do, building new stuff. So I think that's sort of amazing. And so the good news is the DevOps community is finally starting to figure this out. And what I find really, really fascinating is many of these very successful companies have done a fair bit of work, looking at the bigger picture and really getting, at this DevOps picture, and really at least trying to streamline this build and run stuff, looking at the full system life cycle, as it were. So I think there's some interesting things to be said there. Now, what are some of the activities? So this is actually moving into this plan and this run environment. This is new ground for the Disciplinarial Agile delivery framework. But anyways, so some of the things you might want to consider, that are included in planning, things like people management or human resource management, whatever you want to call that, portfolio management, enterprise architecture, reuse engineering. So reuse at a coherent level. Everybody likes to talk about reuse, but many organizations really sort of struggle with it. Web services have sort of improved things. We get some reuse and some frameworks, and that's about it. And then code and copy, copying code and stuff like that. But we really don't get this true benefit of like product line engineering, like reuse from like product lines and stuff like that. This promise that we've had for 20 years now, and a lot of it is just because of challenging approaches to architecture, lack of consistency, development teams that really aren't following any sort of coherent enterprise guidelines. On the build side, we've got a bunch of interesting things. There's different ways. So in Disciplinarial Agile delivery, we support 4 different types of life cycle: a continuous delivery life cycle, a lean startup or exploratory life cycle, a basic, what we call the basic life cycle, like this agile scrummish type of a life cycle, and then a lean Kanban type of a life cycle. Different teams in different situations will follow different approaches. So any reasonable framework that tries to be at least semi-sufficient for enterprise has got to be able to support multiple ways of working. Now, we don't explicitly support things like a traditional life cycle or a unified process life cycle, so there's some things that are definitely out of scope for us, but or at least we choose to make them out of scope, and we'll continue to make that choice. As well as release management. So how do we do release management at an IT level? So yes, it's fairly straightforward for a single team to release into production on a regular basis. But what happens if you've got hundreds of teams in flight, and suddenly we've got to start coordinating these releases? Being the release management crowd, having to coordinate many hundreds of teams perhaps, or even just dozens of teams trying to stick things into production at relatively the same time can be quite interesting, because you want to make sure we're not stepping on each other's feet, and we can only have so much downtime if you're still in that sort of a situation. So anyways, this can become an interesting phenomena. And then finally, we've got the run stuff. We've got to operate and support our systems, including data management disappeared. Anyways, data management should be somewhere on that slide. Bugs in the slides, what can I say? Okay, so yeah, we've got to operate and support our system. We should be doing continuous improvement. So yes, it's great that individual teams are doing process improvement. That's a phenomenally good thing. But you know what? My team should share our improvements with others. Like why, if my team figures out that regression testing is a good thing to do, why should all of your teams also have to go through this effort of figuring that out? Right? Why, we should have mechanisms, organizational mechanisms in place where my team gets motivated to share our learnings, so that way you can leverage them, and vice versa. I can learn from you. Okay, so we can do this continuous process improvement stuff. And then finally, that evil swear word of governance, we are being governed. There's all these debates about governance, and some people consider governance a swear word and all that sort of stuff, but the reality is we're being governed. And should we not be governed well? So if you work in an organization where somebody's asking you for a budget, or somebody's asking you to track your time, track your costs, you're being governed. If somebody's asking you to, what your levels of quality are, you're being governed. If you've got a project dashboard that somebody else, other outside of your team is looking at, you're being governed. If you're working in an environment where there's like defined roles and responsibilities, so Scrum Master or Product Owner or whatever your roles and responsibilities are, that's an aspect of governance. You are being governed. So should you not be governed effectively? Should you not demand to be governed effectively? Good governance should be all about making it as easy as possible for you to do your jobs well. It shouldn't be about this command and control stuff. It shouldn't be about making your lives miserable. Now, your organization's approach to governance might be about that right now, but it certainly doesn't have to be like that. I've worked in organizations where senior management is in fact making life significantly better for the development teams. They are effectively working for the teams to make things easier for them. And that's what good governance is all about, enabling the teams to do the right thing, making it as easy as possible for the teams to do the right thing. Now, I've worked in many organizations where that is certainly not the case. And it's not because management is evil, it's not because they're actively trying to sink your project, it's because they might not understand the implications of what they're asking for. Or they might not be, asking, they might have very good reasons to be asking to do things, but they might not realize there's better ways to accomplish their goals. So as professionals, if you believe in this philosophy of wanting to be governed effectively, we need to step up and we need to say, we are agile team, we are working in an agile manner, we are working in a lean manner, and here's how you could govern us effectively. Because if you don't step up, then the governance people are going to figure it out on their own, and they will do whatever it is that they do, and it might not be as agile as you like. So we need to take responsibility, and we need to help work with these people. And that's a good thing to do. So an interesting thing, so I mentioned DevOps earlier. So what is DevOps? I think is a fair question. So yeah, if you ask 10 different people what DevOps is, you'll probably get at least 10 different answers. So one answer for DevOps is it's all about continuous delivery. A lot of people in the Agile community are really focused on how can we get more stuff out the door quicker. Okay, fine, that's pretty interesting stuff. That seems to be all about dev though, not really anything about ops, but I think it's a good thing. Or maybe it's really about streamlining operations, doing this streamlined development plus streamlining operations and support. Seems reasonable. Or maybe it's about streamlining all types of software development, because not all teams are doing continuous delivery, and yet we could still we could still improve the way that my traditional team is working with the operations folks. We should probably be streamlining release management. We should probably also be streamlining data management as well. I would consider this to be one aspect of run. How are we operating, doing all this data management stuff? Because it's no good. Yeah, it's great that if I can develop software fast to get in production, but I can't add a column to a database in less than 3 months. And I've worked in some organizations where it literally takes 3 months to add a column to a production database. Then how can I possibly claim I'm doing continuous delivery when I've got that sort of a lag time in between making a request to make a simple database change, right? So we've got to work with our data management folks in order to help make them more effective, help them to learn and adopt new agile data type techniques. So the opportunity is there. So the implication of all this is DevOps will mean different. It has a different meaning in different organizational settings, and your company will need. If you are interested in DevOps, and I highly suggest you should be interested, as an organization, you're going to have to start thinking about what does this really mean to us, and it might not be. It might be a little bit more than all this really cool continuous delivery stuff that we like to focus on. Certainly that should be part of it, but it's more than likely not everything. And then what does it mean to scale Agile? So I was sort of hinting at this. So for example, does that mean large-scale Scrum? So if you've only got one hammer in your toolkit, it must be a really big hammer. Is this the way we're going to think about it? Does it mean build for large teams? So should we be able to do Scrum at scale and Kanban at scale and other things at scale and make them work effectively? Or does it mean Agile for the IT department? Should the entire IT department be working at scale? Because my 200-person Agile project more than likely has to interact with the enterprise architecture team. More than likely we need to interact with the data management team. More than likely we need to interact with the operations team at some point. So if those other teams aren't also working in an Agile manner, something's going to happen. And it's probably not what we want to happen, right? And I'm sure you see that in your organizations all the time, that we have these very successful Agile teams or reasonably successful Agile teams, but as soon as they start touching these other groups, that's when we've got problems. And it's the culture, organizational culture, management doesn't get. We have all these excuses, but at the end of the day, you've got to ask yourself the question, if the data management group, just to pick on them for a bit, if they're slowing you up, if they work slowly for whatever reason, or you perceive them to work slowly, have you stepped up and helped them, tried to interact with them and tried to help them get better? Because if not, I really would question what position you're in to actually complain about why they're working slowly if you haven't done anything to try to help them, right? And help, because it could be that nobody stopped and had a conversation with them and started making some started saying, hey, why don't we work together and figure this stuff out so that way we can get columns added to databases a little faster. Maybe there's something I can do on my end to speed this up. Maybe there's something that we could work on together to learn how to get better at this, because there's some wonderful Agile database techniques over here that you might want to be aware of. So there's ways we can improve things. And the same thing, I would say the same thing with the enterprise architecture team, the governance folks, and so on. So anyways, I don't think there is one right answer for scaling Agile. It depends is the answer. We might not even know what it means to scale yet, because I think I've discussed two reasonably different versions of scaling. Scaling to the enterprise, or scaling to the IT department, versus just scaling a single delivery team and being able to handle multiple situations. So, what is Disciplined Agile delivery? So, Disciplined Agile delivery has several. First of all, it's a process decision framework. So, what we're trying to achieve with DAD is we make this observation that development teams are making process-related decisions on a fairly regular basis, and they might not explicitly understand they're making process decisions. So for example, as a developer, I could choose to do test-first programming, or choose not to. I could choose to do test later or test after programming, or I could choose to do testless programming where I throw my code over the wall. Those are all process choices, and there's advantages and disadvantages to each one of those choices. I could choose to create user stories, or choose to create usage scenarios, or choose to create personas, or combinations thereof. And those are all process choices. Which ones make the most sense for my situation? Do I know? Or am I writing user stories because that's what I've been told to do? Probably, in most cases, I'm writing user stories because that's the only thing I've been told to do. That's the only thing I know. So I've made a very important process decision there, didn't even realize it, because that's what's been prescribed by several methodologies now. So anyways, we need to get away, we need to become more goal-driven, more flexible in our approach. So anyways, so DAD is a hybrid, so we're adopting ideas from Scrum and XP and Kanban and Agile modeling and DevOps and unified process and even the evil traditional stuff, SAFe, many other sources. We've got some of the Agile and Lean stuff you would expect. It's very learning oriented, very iterative and incremental, people oriented. It's people first, because people build solutions, not just not tools, not processes. An interesting philosophy that we bring to the table is we try to bring back this idea of being solution focused, not just software focused. I think the Agile community has gotten on a bad path on this one, because there's more to it than just building software. So when I build a solution, my solution runs on hardware. We often have to upgrade the hardware. Even if it's deploying to the cloud, that's effectively a hardware upgrade when it gets down to it, right? My solution is supported by documentation, which I need to deliver along with this software that we're building. My solution often changes the business process around the usage of this system. So I need to be thinking about that. My solution often changes the organization structure around the usage of the system. So it's not just about software. We really need to be solution focused. We need to be looking at the bigger picture if we want to be effective, if we want to be successful. So let's make this explicit. And we promote this idea of being enterprise aware, that my team needs to work with other teams in order to get the job done. We want to leverage these other teams. So up until recently, the DAD framework has been focused on this build stuff. So as I said, we support 4 different delivery life cycles. So let's talk about that. So one of the things that we do is we explicitly support a full delivery life cycle. So we use swear words like phase and serial, because it's empirically, phenomenally easy to observe that these project teams or these product teams go through phases. So at some point in time, somebody must have had an idea or a concept to do this product or to run this project team. Somebody makes a decision, we start funding it, and then we kick the team off. We start putting the team together, we start doing some initial scoping, some initial architecture. At some point in time, we go hat in hand asking for funding. Then eventually, in Scrum we call this sprint 0, although it's on average 4 weeks, not just 2 weeks, but minor details on average. Then we get into construction where we build things. Eventually we release into production, also almost always a non-trivial effort. The average Agile team spends about 4 weeks doing transition. So let's, obviously room for improvement on that one. I would rather, transition should really be an activity that's, several minutes or several hours, but on average it's about 4 weeks. And eventually we operate and support our system in production or in the marketplace in the case of a commercial company. So this is a high-level version of a life cycle where we start putting things into context. This is a slightly more detailed version of the life cycle. We call this our basic or Scrum-based life cycle. Many Agile teams will start with something like this. So we work in priority order. We have this explicit inception phase where we get going in the right direction. We have this explicit construction phase, explicit transition phase. The vast majority of Agile teams, roughly 80% of Agile teams, are in a position where they're working on the new release of an existing system. So I'm working on release 17, and release 16 is already up and running in production. So as a result, I'm getting change requests and defect reports coming in from the usage of the existing system. Those are new requirements which should be prioritized, put on the stack, and we build them when we get to them. Many organizations have business or technology roadmaps or some sort of enterprise architecture, enterprise portfolio, or product management stuff going on. So we've got visions of how we should be working. These visions should be evolving over time, but these are important things that are guiding my team. We should have, in this case, we're showing some lightweight milestones because we are in fact being governed, and like I said, I prefer to be governed effectively. So if we can give advice to the governance team as to here's a lightweight set of risk-based milestones as opposed to document-based milestones, which they're probably doing right now, we can actually reduce the governance burden on the Agile teams and more than likely get better governance as a result. So we can work smarter, not harder. But we would have to engage intelligently with the people doing governance. So that can be a bit of a challenge for us when, because if we go with the attitude that governance is evil, more than likely that conversation is shut down within about 10 seconds. So, generally people don't like to be told what they do is evil or that they themselves are evil. So anyways, we need to go in with an open attitude. We also support a lean startup or an exploratory life cycle because the reality is this good lean startup concepts, they're not just for startups. They're for anybody doing new product development. I'm working with an insurance company right now where they're doing lean startup type stuff for experimenting to identify what types of products they actually want to bring to the marketplace because they've had some relatively bad experiences spending tens of millions of dollars bringing products to the marketplace that nobody's interested in. So now they would rather spend a couple $100,000 exploring, trying to identify what the marketplace might or might not want, and then finally when they hit on an idea that seems to work, then they productize it by kicking into one of the other life cycles. We support a lean life cycle. So any reasonable sized organization will have some Agile teams, they'll have some leanish, Kanban-ish type teams. They might have one or two of these exploratory projects going on, depending on the situation. Different teams in different situations will do different things. So at scale, at the IT level, if I'm a senior manager, I've got to be able to support these teams doing different life cycles because it makes sense. So I'm going to have to be flexible enough to handle that. Some teams doing continuous delivery where, every few hours or every few days, they're putting more good stuff into production. I've also got, as a senior manager, I'd also have to be able to govern those types of teams and be able to support them. So we need frameworks that have this wide range of support for different life cycles. And this is easy to observe. Like the consultant, or when we afterwards, ask some of the consultants who get to see multiple organizations. They'll all have stories like this, saying, "Oh yeah, we had a few of these Agile teams, a few ASC nodding heads, right? A few of these Agile teams, a few of these lean teams, and so on." This is the reality on the ground. So that tells us that any framework that's going to help us scale to become an Agile IT department or a lean IT department is going to have to be able to support multiple life cycles. One process size does not fit all. When we started putting the DAD framework together, the genesis of this was myself and a bunch of others, we were going around the world working with organizations, observing what they were doing, trying to help them understand how to scale Agile. And it was some of my colleagues at IBM, some of our business partners as well as doing that, and we started sharing our observations. And some of the basic observations that we had were, first of all, these organizations that were doing Agile, at least reasonably successfully, they were all doing it in different ways. And even teams within the same organization were working in different ways. We also noticed basic things like these organizations that were sort of figuring it out were spending a lot of time and a lot of money doing so. Phenomenal amounts of waste industry-wide as a result. And they're all making the same basic mistake. They're running the same problems. And we see this, you get into any discussion forums and you'll see these discussions of all these people suffering from the same basic challenges. Pretty easy to observe. So we decided, let's put this, we should try to help. We should try to put some sort of a process framework or something together to give some better guidance to show how all this stuff fits together. The challenge we had, though, was, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, let's put a process framework together, but then when the answer is, well, it depends, because every single company is doing it differently, that's brutal. So it took us about 6 months to figure this out, but we ended up coming up with what we call this goal-based idea. And the idea here is that based on the observation that even though everybody was doing Agile differently, they had their own flavor of Agile or their own flavor of Lean, they were fulfilling the same basic process goals, the same basic capabilities. So when we started a team or started a project, we had to put the team together. We had to, you got to do some initial scoping. You got to secure funding at some point. You need to put your work environment together. If you're smart, you start your risk management stuff going. Some basic fundamental things were happening. Now, teams, my team was exploring initial scope differently than your team because we were in different situations, but we still had to do some sort of initial scoping. During construction, we need to put together a potentially consumable solution. There's obviously many different ways we can do that, there's different, so once again, we still were producing, or potentially shippable software if you still want to use the Scrum terminology, but it's really all about solutions, not software, and it's not really about being shippable. Because if I ship garbage, am I successful? Probably not, right? I want to ship stuff that people want to pay for, that they want to use. So yes, it's cute that we're shippable, but I really want something that's consumable or usable, not just shippable, right? So it's consumable solutions we're looking for, not just shippable software. Significantly different mindset. We need to address changing stakeholder needs somehow. We need to invest in improving quality. I would hope that we're investing in improving quality somehow, paying down the technical debt as we go, hopefully not injecting new technical debt as well. The smarter teams would prove the architecture early with working code. Let's take the mystery, let's take the risk out of these solutions that we're building. When we go to transition, we need to make sure that the solution is ready to ship, and then we need to ship it. Pretty straightforward stuff. All the way through any sort of effort, we should be growing our team members. We should be trying to improve our process, improve our environment. We need to be coordinating activities both within the team and with other teams. So a bunch of very common things that we had to do, but all these teams were doing these things, but doing it in different ways. So for example, so how do you capture that? So this is something we call a goal diagram. And the way that you read this is, so we've got so on this mind map, we've got 22 process goals. One of the process goals is to secure funding. This is one of the easier ones to communicate. So when we secure funding, we have two factors or two process issues we need to consider. How are we going to go about funding this effort? So are we going to go time and materials? Are we going to do fixed price? Are we going to do time and materials with bonus? Are we going to have some sort of a funding pool type of a thing? So there's various different ways we can do this. And then how do we get access to this money? Do we have to put in a formal request and jump through some hoops and get a sign off and eventually somebody gives us some money? Or is it more of an informal thing, rah, this is what we're going to do. I need funding for the next 3 months for 10 people, right? So, or anywhere in between. Each and every one of these techniques has advantages and disadvantages. There's no such thing as a best practice. So in different situations, you will do different things. In this case, for both of these process factors, we see an arrowhead on this list, and what that indicates is that in general, the strategies towards the top of the list are generally more effective than the strategies towards the bottom of the list. So one of the interesting things that we do in DAD is sometimes we suggest some suboptimal ways of working. Because right now, in your organizations, I've got to think some of you are working in companies where you're still doing fixed price stuff on your Agile teams, right? Generally not a great idea. You can still be Agile in that situation, but it's throwing some constraints on you. It's definitely not an ideal business decision for your team. So instead of just complaining about it, oh, management's stupid, they're evil, all this stuff, well, why not have an intelligent conversation with the people that are doing funding? Why not say, there's several other ways that we can approach funding. Right now, we're doing this fixed price, you want a reasonably exact answer, and that's injecting a heck of a lot of risk. Here's like 1 or 2 advantages for you. Here's this very long list of disadvantages. And here we have some better options. So maybe we can move away from this fixed price stuff and let's start doing stage gate, where we're funding in quarterly chunks, or every 2 months we get a new chunk of funding. Reducing risk requires a little more governance, but might be more palatable for you. So far more advantages and still a few disadvantages, but a lot better than what we're currently doing now. Think maybe we could experiment with this and run this on a few teams and see what happens? You might have a shot at starting to improve your funding mechanisms. But if you don't have a coherent set of options, if you can't speak this financial lingo, then chances are pretty good you're going to end up still doing fixed price years from now. So we need to step up and start helping the organization make better decisions. So we want to make these decisions explicit. We want to help people understand what the advantages and disadvantages are of these various options they have. Here's another example of a goal diagram, in this case exploring initial scope. So when we're exploring initial scope, we've got some basic issues we need to think about. How much detail are we going to capture? What views are we going to capture? Because there's different ways we can do modeling. It's not just a user story universe. How are we going to go about modeling? Are we going to have relatively informal Agile type modeling sessions, or are we going to go very formal, do formal JADs from the 1980s? How are we going to go about managing our work items? There's several different ways that we can manage changing requirements later in the life cycle. We need to decide fairly early in a project or in a product team how we're going to go about, at least initially, go about managing change, because that's going to motivate other decisions. So for example, if we decide to have a formal change control board in order to manage our changing requirements, might not be such a good idea, but if that's the decision we go with, more than likely that's going to motivate us to do greater levels of detail in our requirements. Those two things tend to go hand in hand. If we have a more flexible approach to managing our requirements change, we can have less details in our requirements, type of a thing. How are we going to address non-functional requirements? Interesting question to be answered. There's multiple ways we can do that. So the point is that we've got choices. Different teams in different situations will make a different set of choices, so that small co-located team in a fairly straightforward situation will make a certain set of decisions that geographically distributed 200-person team in a regulatory environment will make a different set of decisions because they face a different environment. Context counts. What's also interesting, I didn't point this out, but the strategies that are bolded are generally geared for team, so if you're on a team that's in a reasonably co-located, reasonably small, reasonably straightforward situations like the average Agile team, we suggest a bunch of defaults. So if you don't, because it can be overwhelming having this amount of choices, right? Having all these options available to you can be overwhelming. Okay, so to sort of counteract that, we give some reasonable defaults. Now we're not saying that defaults are going to work for you, but we are saying here's a good starting point. Chances are reasonably good they're going to work for you, but you still might want to do a little bit of thinking and tailor accordingly. Here's the goal diagram for producing a potentially consumable solution. This is a construction phase goal. This is where all the programming type stuff, the just-in-time design strategies, just-in-time requirements gathering strategies, just-in-time planning or planning strategies, and how we go about assuring consumability or usability. Consumability is our term for usability because it's more than just about usability. It's just slightly more than that. But if you like the term usability, then fine. call it usability. I can definitely live with that. We talked about this earlier. DAD teams are enterprise aware. So we want to be working in a more robust manner. Because if my team is not working well with other teams, I've got zero chance of scaling. I've got zero chance of taking on these more complex situations. It's just not going to happen. We've got to work well with the rest of the teams. So that was basically DAD version 1. The new version that we're currently working on, so we've been publishing over the last few months and we'll continue to be publishing, is we're expanding into some more of these IT, what we call IT areas or IT process blades. So for example, now this is all work in progress, so don't take this as carved in stone at all. But here's a goal diagram for addressing enterprise architecture. So our message to the enterprise architects of the world, which shouldn't be a surprise, is that there's multiple ways we can approach enterprise architecture, that it's a reasonably complex endeavor and an important endeavor, and that we need to find ways to be more agile, more lean. On the operations side of things, this is in many ways a simplified overview of ITIL, or some aspects of ITIL, I should say. So we need to do disaster mitigation. We need to govern. Oh, that's another interesting point. Governance is baked right into all this sort of stuff. So the enterprise architecture team is involved with some aspects of governing the architecture. We have to govern the operation, the operations efforts. We're also obviously in operations. We're running things. We're managing our infrastructure. We might be managing change to our infrastructure. So it's fairly easy to release an application into production. Reasonably difficult to release new infrastructure into production. So for example, if you've ever had to do an operating system upgrade, that's a relatively non-trivial thing when you've got hundreds or thousands of servers up and running in production. Or if you're trying to upgrade to a new version of Oracle from Oracle 11.1 to 12.0 or whatever your upgrade path currently is. That can be a non-trivial and phenomenally risky endeavor from an operations point of view. People like it when their databases work for some strange reason. I don't know why, but stuff happens. There's different ways we can approach reuse engineering. There's, reuse is usually a bit of a disaster in most organizations, as I was saying earlier. We talk a good game, but at the end of the day, we don't really pull it off because it's very hard. If you don't have your architecture act together, chances are pretty good reuse is going to be hard. If you don't have a coherent funding structure for reuse, it's going to be hard. If you don't have a coherent change management strategy for reuse, it's pretty easy to release a reusable component and get 20, 30 teams to reuse it. And then what happens when I release the next version of that reusable component? Uh-oh, a slight configuration management challenge now. So if I don't have my act together on that, and I don't fund and maintain that, and if I don't have a way to support these reusable components, why would a development team reuse something that's not going to be supported? That would be a phenomenally risky thing to do, right? So if you want to pull off reuse in your organization, you've really got to think through these configuration management, these architecture issues, these funding issues, and they're all non-trivial. And all you've got to do is make a mistake on one of them, and you've put your reuse effort at risk. So there's some interesting issues going on there. So our claim is that the DAD framework is definitely helping to scale. Right now, it's helping to scale agile delivery into these harder situations, but we're also actively working on providing a solid foundation for which to scale into the across the entire IT spectrum as well, based on empirical observations of what's working, what's not working, and also leveraging some very good bodies of knowledge out there, because we definitely do not want to reinvent the wheel. So just to sort of wrap things up here, what are some of the implications for doing transformation within organizations? So what are some of the things that we've observed over the last few years? So first of all, how do a lot of these transformation strategies usually go? There's this vision that we'll do a few pilot projects, we'll spin up development team 1, development team 2, and usually that's pretty successful, right? Because you'll stack the deck, you'll put your better people on it, you'll choose the projects that where the business stakeholders are more receptive to this crazy agile stuff, and things go well. And we start rolling out to team 3, team 4, and eventually we're going to roll this across the entire organization. That's the strategy. But what often happens, sure, the first couple teams, yeah, we stack the deck. Of course that's going to work. How could it not work? But then we start adopting teams where maybe some of the stakeholders really aren't quite as flexible as we would like. We start having to use some of our B players, right? We can no longer stack the deck with have all our best people on the Agile teams because we've run out of our best people. Now we're talking about the second tier and third tier of people in our department, right? So we're increasing the risk and things are decreasing, people quality-wise. So eventually it blows up in our face. And other things happen too. It starts becoming harder. As we start taking on more complex problems, we start realizing, oh, wait a minute, this enterprise architecture team, very difficult to work with. This data management team, they've got their own weird way of working, very slow and doing whatever, collecting lots of metadata and stuff like that. So what does a more successful Agile transformation look like? First of all, it's enterprise aware. It realizes that my development team has to interact with these other IT level teams. So when we spin up development team number 1 to do Agile, the implication is that any team that they touch also has to be prepared to work in an Agile manner. So if this development team is going to be supported by the enterprise architects, then somebody in the enterprise architecture team needs to be prepared to work in a more Agile, more flexible manner. Same thing on the data management side, same thing on the IT governance side. If not, we're going to be injecting risk. So then but at the same time, the enterprise architecture team just can't go Agile across the board because they need to be able to support all of the non-Agile teams that are also in flight. So I might spend a couple months coaching a development team to become more Agile and help them get going and self-sustaining. But if I'm coaching the enterprise architecture team, which I need to do, this is going to be a multi-year effort because I've got to coach them and they have to evolve at the same pace as Agile spreads across your development teams. So if I've got 200 development teams, and I've deployed Agile to 20 of them, then the enterprise architects have to, roughly 10% of them need to be able to work in an Agile manner, and the other 90% need to be working in a non-Agile manner. Then as I roll Agile out to more development teams, then more enterprise architects need to be Agile, and so on and so on and so on. Until finally we get to the point where the number, whatever percentage of development teams are going to be Agile or linear organization, we've reached that point, and that's roughly the percentage of the rest of the IT organization that's also working in an Agile manner, because they need to be able to support and work with these Agile or quasi-Agile teams, as the case may be. So these groups that are in the plan, and there's more to it than that, but these groups that are in the plan and run environment have a multi-year transition time frame. And the things that the enterprise architecture team is interested and concerned about is much different than what the development teams are concerned about, which is much different than data management, which is much different than governance, and so on and so on and so on. Each of those IT groups have their own unique body of knowledge, which often overlaps with other ones. I'm sure you're all aware of the ongoing battle between the PMI and the IIBA. The PMI is evolving into the business analysis area. The business analysts are taking on project management stuff and so on. Okay, fine. And this is and it's not, that's just a classic example, but we see this across the board in all these other spaces as well. And their bodies of knowledge contradict each other, as well as this body of knowledge, if you want to call it that, in the Agile world. So this is what we're faced with in these enterprises. So this is hard, this is complex, and we need to go in eyes wide open, otherwise interesting things will happen. So we need to worry about people and culture, we need to worry about process-related issues and tooling issues. Now, my experience is that roughly 70 to 80% of our effort is going to be around transitioning people, but we still have to spend some effort doing process and some effort on the tooling stuff. So this is from a survey we ran about a year ago, going to the Agile community itself, and we asked two basic sets of questions. One set of questions was around how difficult were these various issues when you were doing your Agile adoption. And sure enough, people and culture stuff was in the top, two of the top three, but adopting technical practices was the second most difficult thing that people were sharing. And some of the easy things were all these management practices, having a daily stand-up meeting and running a demo and stuff like that. Yeah, it's not that hard to adopt those things, right? So, and sure enough, adopting them was not perceived to be very difficult. When it came to, and the other set of questions is the exact same set of questions, but now we're asking how important was it? It's not how difficult, but how important were those issues during your Agile adoption or your Agile transformation. Once again, these people and cultural issues were high up, but the survey showed that people thought that adopting the Agile management practices were very important to their success. But once again, we've got some people and cultural stuff up here and some process stuff coming in a close second. So this often doesn't match with some of the rhetoric we hear about, and it's good rhetoric around the importance of people and culture and focusing on that, but we also need to invest some effort into this process and this tool stuff too. And I think many organizations sort of underinvest in this process stuff because of the culture in the Agile community, I think. We've been so good at bashing process for so long now that we've sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater. So that seems to be what's happening. So you need to address all three issues. So some realities: invest in coaching, invest in training. Expect this to take years. If you think this is a silver bullet, you are sorely mistaken. This is a multi-year. This is a journey. It's not a destination. This is a multi-year effort. You will never actually reach the destination. You will never find perfection. You will never reach nirvana. This is a continuing journey for you. You really need to get into this process improvement, organizational improvement mindset. This is how you're successful, by embedding those sorts of techniques and those sorts of ways of thinking into your culture. So just to wrap up here, so the story I told. I'm a firm believer in Agile delivery. I think some wonderful things have been going on in our community, both Agile and Lean, I should say. Bunch of great stuff, and it's definitely an important part of the overall picture. We've made some good inroads. But over the next decade or two, we need to start expanding our horizons. We really should be talking about Agile IT or Lean IT now, and we should be actively trying to go after it. And that means that from a developer point of view, we need to be looking outside of the programming box. We really need to be looking at these bigger pictures. And at scale, particularly at scale, some of this stuff, this governance stuff might not be so sexy, but it's absolutely critical for you. This architecture stuff might not be so sexy, absolutely critical for you. And so on and so on and so on. And we need to outreach to some of these communities. We need to start working coherently with data management. And many others. If you look at some of the Agile conferences, these Agile meetups, we'll give the Agile meetup guys a hard time. How often do you have talks about Agile data management, or Agile data warehousing, or Agile enterprise architecture? How many times do we see people from the enterprise architecture community speaking at Agile conferences? How many times do we see Agile, the Agile speaker folks, actively speaking, trying to speak and do outreach into the data community or into the architecture community or even into the project management community? We got reasonably good experiences with that now, but certainly, if you were to go online tonight and take a look at what's going on in the data management community, not a lot of discussions about Agile. But then again, if you look at most of the Agile events, not a lot of discussions about database stuff too, and yet we're storing, most of us are writing applications, writing software that store data somewhere eventually. So should we not get good at that as well? So let's start thinking outside the box a bit. And then finally, this will enable an Agile or a Lean enterprise. And frankly, we need to be working on all three of these levels at once, because in most companies I work in now, the business people are the ones that are providing significant pressure on IT to get better, to become more efficient, to work faster, to become more effective. And because they desperately want to be more competitive in the marketplace, and they know the only way they can do that. Well, one of the key things to be able to do that is to become more effective at IT. So my parting advice: your organization, your team is unique. One size does not fit all. There's no one perfect organization structure for all companies. There is no one process that fits all. You need to be flexible. You need to be prepared to make decisions. You need to be prepared to own your process, to own your organization structure. And that means you need to, dirty your hands or sully yourself with this process stuff if you want to be effective. So anyways, hopefully I've given you some things to think about. So I'll leave with this. So we got time for a couple of questions, perhaps? Okay. Gentlemen in the back, we got to get us...
Reasonably simple questions. Safe, I'm going to be careful how I say this. Safe implies there's a big bang.
Yeah.
Everyone, big bang. Kanban implies evolution. What would you suggest under them two terms that DAD is implying?
Yeah, so the question for the people watching, the question was along the lines, so safe implies a big bang approach, Kanban implies more of an evolutionary approach. DAD, so the question is, what does DAD imply? DAD is a lot closer to the evolutionary approach. And because the reality is, the real answer is it depends, but the reality is that you've got to put some structures, a minimal amount of structure in place in order to get going, but the team needs to, my team needs to evolve into whatever is better for us. Your team needs to do the same thing and so on. But at the same time, we need enough, if we're working in the same company, then in order to pull this off at the IT level, then there needs to be some commonality. Both of our teams need to be working with enterprise architecture and so on. So we need to work together as a whole. So we can't just have this local optimization that we often find in development teams.
My question now that you've answered that is, who does all that work?
So the question is, who does all that work?
It's going to last
Yeah.
many years.
Yeah. So
Organisation, forget the size, but that organisation is delivering something. Everyone working on it at present is going to deliver something. Who does all that work?
So all this work of doing this transformation, of getting better, is organization-wide. So whatever scope of organization you're addressing. So if you define your scope to be, I need to improve my software development team processes, then it's just the software development team. That's sort of an easy kill. If you define your scope to be, I just want to improve IT, just is might be the wrong word, but then obviously this is at least an IT level thing. If you're trying to improve the entire organization, then the entire organization needs to get involved, and that's a much different ballgame. But in order to have any sort of coherent success, you really need to engage at the development team, the IT team level, and the organization level, in my experience. So that means the implication there is, because this is a multi-year effort, I need at least my senior management team needs to be on board. They need to understand and supporting it as best they can and sticking to it. This is a multi-year effort. So if you go through a reorg, if you run into any sort of major problems, these multi-year efforts are at risk to things like reorgs, to downturns in the market.
You suggest that all of them three levels that you've had, there need to be specific people with their specific job is to facilitate and guide.
Yes, yes, the answer is you need champions at all levels. So I think a lot of good, a lot of coaching is great, but a lot of the Agile coaching is at the development team level, and we try to engage as best we can with the business, but for the most part, we tend to ignore, particularly if you go in the attitude, I got to protect myself from these other groups in IT, you can't possibly succeed with that attitude. You really need to be prepared to engage, with the data management folks, and that might not be, and the governance folks and everybody else, and that might not be the most palatable and easy thing to do, but if you can't get those other groups to start to move and to start to do self-improvement and stuff like that, and start to align with not only with you but with the other groups too, then your improvement effort's just going to grind to a halt. So that gentleman there, I'm going to actually give you a mic.
So I want to say a big thank you to Simon first, because I think it's been fantastic over the last few weeks to see the different scale of products. So SAFE strikes me as something that's a fantastic packaging of kind of standard Agile practices. Yeah. There's a great story at the team level, great story at the kind of the Agile release train level. Less, well, I think the less we say about less is the best.
Yeah.
For the coders who'd rather forget that the rest of the organisation exists. I'm kind of trying to position you in this market because the message I get tonight is not that it's kind of safe or dad, so much as you're actually slicing it in different ways. And where you come in here is that whereas safe is very much focused on those processes and what are the agile things to do, this is very much about, okay, so what about the rest of the organisation in IT?
Yeah.
What about the management concerns? What about the architectural concerns? And I get a sense and a flavour, and I just want to check this here. I kind of almost feel that is something that you want to be looking at if you're doing enterprise software rather than large-scale product software. So my question is that fair?
Yeah. So right now our focus has been on definitely on the enterprise and on providing a foundation from which to scale. Having said that, we recently published our approach to portfolio management. We're just about to, probably in March, publish program management. We've been actively working on it on DevOps just to sort of clear up that messaging. But as I said, so this year we're moving into more of these spaces. So where SAFE is more of a one size. This is the one way of doing program management and a little bit of portfolio management. What we go in with is, well, wait a minute. There's many different things we need to consider when we're doing this, program management stuff. Here are your options, and then one tailoring of that would be the SAFE approach. But we've got other tailorings that you've got other options, some of which are better, some of which are worse. So choose the approach, the combination of approaches that's best for you, that reflects the reality that you face. We also at the development team level, we give a wider range of options. So we're not going to force you into a single cadence for all of your teams. That's convenient, but it's certainly not required. So there, I've seen many very large agile programs where the sub-teams were on different cadences, and that worked out well. Now, every so often the cadences would line up, and you would release at certain dates, or at least some of the sub-teams would release certain dates, as the case may be. But so there's different ways of doing release management, not just a release train. That's one of several options. It's a good option, but there's other options too. So do what's right for you. But the only way you can do what's right for you is if you know what your options are, you know what your trade-offs are, you have a comprehension of your environment, and you're empowered to make these decisions and start experimenting with what works. And also realize that whatever decisions you make today might be the best decision that you can make right now, but you will evolve away. So whatever you're doing today, you will evolve away from that as you learn, as you get better. So organizations are complex adaptive systems. So my enterprise architecture team, they'll be doing the best they can to be as good as they can be. The data management team will be doing what they can do, and my development team will do what we can do, and so on. And what will happen is, as my team learns and gets better, because we're interacting with these other teams, that will affect the way that they need to work, so then they will learn and get better. And then that will affect other teams and so on. So we're constantly evolving, we're constantly adapting, hopefully for the better. Like sometimes mistakes happen, and it is what it is, and you back out of decisions. But for the most part, the ground, the train the organizational train that we're working in is shifting constantly. If we want to stay alive, if we want to be successful. So all these organizational organisms need to evolve and grow and get better over time. Otherwise, things will happen. So we're constantly learning from each other. We're constantly playing off each other. This can be frustrating, right? Because there is no one way of doing things. Even if there was one way, you would evolve anyways. Like if you believe in any of the agile messaging around the importance of doing retrospectives on a regular basis and learning and improving, by definition, you should be constantly changing your process, constantly changing your organization structure. It's this process game, this improvement game is actually quite a difficult one to play, and this can be frustrating for organizations that want give me a one-size-fits-all, give me a silver bullet, just tell me what to do. And the answer is, well, you need good people working together effectively who are willing to learn from each other and improve. That's the best, most coherent advice I can give, and it's often not what people want to hear, sadly.
Michael still give me a really hard time if I let you get away with that.
Okay.
So my question really is dad a
Both. They're cooperator. I don't know. They're both competitive and complementary. So I think so if you want to be successful at SAFE, the only way that I know how to do it is you need to be good at software development first. So if you don't have decent software development teams, what makes you think you can have a very large, decent software development team? So DAD is all about the details. Right now at least, DAD is all about the details of how do we make our delivery team successful from end to end. And then if you want to tack on some stuff on top of that in order to coordinate a larger program or a portfolio, then so be it. But as I said, we're also actively moving into that space, but giving a goal-based or a capability-based approach as opposed to a prescriptive approach. So I think for any decent enterprise, you're going to have to you need a goal. You need this flexible approach because one size does not fit all. So if you observe, you just make a simple observation that even in a medium-sized organization, you've got some teams doing Scrum, some teams doing Kanban, some teams doing something else. That tells you right away that if I put a portfolio management process in place that basically assumes everybody's doing Scrum and everybody's on the same cadence and everybody's on their same release cadence and all that sort of stuff, well, what do I tell those teams doing Kanban? You got to shut down because SAFE tells you. That's ridiculous. So, and I don't think I've ever been on a reasonable sized organization where every team was working in the same basic way. It's not realistic. I'm sure there's some out there. I've just never seen it. So I think we need to be a little more flexible. One size does not fit all.
That's probably all the time we've got.
Okay.
There will be time for questions, just for sort of like networking questions. We've got some pizzas
that are going cold. Yeah.
So so we ask questions when we're sort of milling around, I guess, is the thing. So thanks very much.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you.